Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Aaron Atwell. Yesterday, I spoke to Sharmila Atwell, his wife, and the day before, I spoke to Rose Atwell. And Aaron and Rose are brother and sister, so this is our little week with the Atwells. It's very nice to have not only uh, spiritual family, but spiritual family and biological family. And I should actually also add that Ken's Ramu Atwell, which is
Ramu.
Aaron and Rose's father, also lives at Ananda Village. So this family is particularly blessed that Master has swept them all into his aura. Very few of us can are so fortunate. I have a sibling. I have a sister who's on the path too, but it's a special grace when that happens. So hello, Aaron. Nice to be with
Hello.
you today. You are speaking to us from
From Sacramento, Rancho Cordova in the Sacramento Ananda community.
how long have you lived there?
Well, it's been 2000, 2014 when we moved in here.
Hmm.
I think it was about a year that we couldn't quite move into the community. Um, there wasn't space yet, so we lived the surrounding areas, South Sac
Uh-huh.
and Citrus Heights for that year. And we were so glad when there was a spot that opened up and we could move in.
And you
So,
live there with your wife and three children,
three
yes?
children.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
10, 13, and 16.
Oh, a big house full. How nice for you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Aaron, tell us a little bit about what your upbringing was like, what kind of a child you were, who you were before you came on the path.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I was really fortunate to have two parents who were on the path, are on the path, and but when I was a child, they were also on the path at that time. They, at one point, when we were living in Santa Rosa, they were hosting the Ananda meditation group there in Santa Rosa, and sometimes we had services in a back room in our house
Uh-huh.
when ministers would come or there and they would have a Sunday service. It wasn't, I don't think it was usually every week,
Uh-huh.
but occasionally when a minister could come.
How old
Um,
were you at that time?
I was 12, 13,
Old
14
enough,
maybe.
old enough to know what was happening.
Yes, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And of course, before that, as Rose was saying, we had interactions with Ananda and with um, the Ananda meditation group. We would go. There was at one point when it was in Katati, actually, and I remember this was a vivid memory I had of going to a Sunday service in Katati, and it was just this like little room above in a business area, and we just walk up these steps and go into this. But I remember walking up the steps and hearing. I think it might have been chanting
Uh-huh.
at the time but I remember the Festival of Light Music, so
Huh.
that's what comes to mind. But hearing the chanting and just it kind of took me in. It kind of captivated me. Just it was more the vibration of it, I think, than anything else. But the sound of it, and we went in, and it was kind of my first memory of an Ananda experience.
Do you know how old you were when that happened?
Well, I must have been quite a bit younger. I would say 6, 7, 8, somewhere around there.
But
And
it spoke to you even at that age, huh?
oh yeah, yeah. And I could I remember, there was the service and the minister talked, and I remember just being bored and not really just knowing what they were talking about or what was going on and why it was taking so long, that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And then the music started in the festival, and I was like, "Oh, what's this?" And so that kind of got my attention, and that spoke to me, and that was something that touched me. And it wasn't something I would have been able to intellectualize at the time and tell you that I was moved by it or anything, but it was something that stayed with me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so how did that influence you? When you say it stayed with you, did it influence the way you lived as a young child or the way you thought?
It's hard for me It's hard for me to tell. I probably did, uh, but I don't think consciously.
Right.
It wasn't like, oh, now I relating to this Ananda Ray, and there wasn't any of that. It was something that was just a memory, and you know, memories can trigger feelings, and then you can end up kind of adapting and changing in ways that you don't think of, you're not conscious of.
Mhm.
So there was that probably happened, but it was a gradual thing that happened through my childhood. I think being uh, up around the Ananda energy, visiting Ocean Song, being in going to Sunday services, and we visited Ananda Village a number of times,
Uh-huh.
and it slowly dawned on me, uh, the power and the attunement that I had with it.
Uh-huh.
Um, but again, it wasn't something I could consciously understand, but it was something that I felt,
Mhm.
and didn't know quite what to do about. So it just was there, and at some point, I knew I would do something more about it,
Uh-huh.
but I knew I just didn't have the resolve or the energy or the motivation to do anything quite more about it yet.
Uh-huh.
Um, our mother and father, they talked to us about things, about the teachings. They brought things up that were, uh, you know, yogic understanding of things.
Uh-huh.
Um, but nothing was forced on us. Not you didn't. We didn't. Nobody said you had to do this. And I think it was particularly because they were that opposite, the boomer generation that rebelled from this. Okay, this is how life is, and this is what you have to do. And
Uh-huh.
so they didn't want to impose anything on us.
I understand.
So it was, oh, this is what we do, and this is why we do it, and maybe you'd like to join us, that kind of thing. And I'm so grateful for that, because that allowed me to know that it was mine
Right.
when I was able to figure it out. So
Were you a thoughtful child? Did you ponder the meaning of life, or were you just playing and not thinking about things?
I think I did. Um, I wish I had better memory of
Mhm. That's all
things
right.
like that. But I think I was thoughtful, and yeah, and was kind of interested in deeper understanding of things.
Mhm.
I'm not sure where it took me exactly. I mean, like I said, it was gradual. So there were times when I was able to have a deeper understanding. There were times when things would click, but it was a little piece here, a little piece there. Um, and I was more drawn and more convinced by the things that touched my heart. So
So you mentioned the music. Did you grow up with the Swami's music or Master's chants or?
yeah, certainly. I mean, when we went to services or um, things like that, we heard them chanting. And when I'd hear a new chant, I'd be like, "Oh, what's this? And how does it go?" And so I certainly enjoyed that, and his music. I don't remember so much of I know I was subject to them, but I don't know if I remember them specifically. A piece of music that
Right.
stood out, but I do remember a lot of the chanting. Um, and I remember going to Ananda Village with my parents sometimes when they would be like a weekend,
Uh-huh.
or 4 days, or there would be a retreat or something, and interacting with people and being there and just being um, very taken in by the vibration there, and not wanting to leave when we were going to leave.
Uh-huh.
I remember one time when we were going to leave, actually, and we were leaving the expanding light, and must have been spring sometime, because it was kind of sunny, but also the clouds were out, and then it started to sprinkle,
Uh-huh.
and it was so touching, because it felt to me like, because I was kind of sad at leaving,
Uh-huh.
and it felt to me like Divine Mother was um, sharing in that, and but it was beautiful too because there was like a rainbow, and there was that, it was that kind of misty um, rain that was just sparkly, and the whole thing just opened my heart and helped me to um, remember how special Ananda was as we were leaving. So
Do you remember?
um,
Go ahead.
yeah,
Do you
that was.
remember the first time you met Swami Kriyananda?
I was trying to think of that because I thought that might come up, but
Mhm.
um, again, it was something gradual.
Uh-huh.
Um, I had seen his books, and I had heard talks of his and listened to them, and so he was kind of he was almost a celebrity by the time
Uh-huh.
I I actually got to be at a physical talk of his or something like that. There was that kind of self consciousness around it about meeting somebody who you idolize and who you are look up to. So um, I I think I was a little bit too caught in that
Uh-huh.
to remember. But of course, I mean that didn't last for too long. But yeah, it gradually, there was a the first time was probably watching a talk of his
Uh-huh.
in person at maybe at the expanding light or something, and then um, not really having any interaction with him. Um, but yeah, it was. I was just impressed. I guess
Mhm.
is really impressed by his energy,
Mhm.
and because it spoke volumes, much more than you hear words, and it's so natural to want to intellectualize it, but it was just his vibration that helped me understand that, oh, this is real.
When when did you read, or let me phrase it differently. When did you read Autobiography of a Yogi, or when did you reach the point where you realized that you could take the initiative and really make Ananda something that was for you and not just your family?
Yeah. um there was a time, I think when I was around 16,
Mhm.
15 or 16,
Mhm.
can't remember, it was somewhere around there, and we had the autobiography. My mom talked about it, she gave it to me, said, oh, you might want to read this at some point, but I wasn't much of a reader, and
Mhm.
uh, I tried reading it a few times and I couldn't get through it.
Mhm.
I started hitting words and I didn't know what they meant, and it just made it difficult for me to try to uh, tune into it. I couldn't get through it, and I would put it down. But I would pick it up periodically, and I'd look through, and I'd see the pictures, and those were really interesting. And I'd read some of the chapter headlines, and just kind of enjoy the vibration of it.
Uh-huh.
But at a certain point, I picked it up and I started reading it, and it clicked.
Uh-huh.
I was ready, I guess, to read it, and that was uh, that was something that was, yeah, there was a shift there for me, I guess, with that, and I was able to read it, and it was I could feel like I was being drawn.
Mhm.
My master was drawing me. I wouldn't have thought about how to that I would have said that at the time, but you know the book and his vibration in the book were drawing me into something deeper, and it naturally wanted to just keep reading and figure out what that was.
Mhm.
And so that's when I was able to really read the autobiography.
How old
And
how old were you at that point?
around 15 or 16, I think.
So just not still a teenager, yeah.
Yeah. And it was right around that time, when then I said I want to learn to meditate.
Mhm.
And one of the ministers came, and I got like hung saw, and I didn't really practice it regularly. It
Mhm.
was intermittent, and I didn't have the discipline for it.
Mhm.
But I did meditate periodically.
Mhm.
And but it was my whole teenage years were a struggle in a certain sense, because um, being in junior high, it was really tough for me being around uh, kids that were trying to flex their muscles, and there were a lot of people who were rougher at the junior high I went to, and I was not imposing on other people, and I did not, I wanted there to be harmony. So I naturally was the weak one that people would try to pick on or try to beat up and that kind of thing. So that happened, and actually there was a group of people I was around that were um, uh, I hung out with, and I eventually learned that I realized they weren't really my friends, the way that they treated me and the way things happened. Um, but it was it was something that led to my disillusionment with the world, and it allowed me to it caused me to want to withdraw and to be kind of not around, not hang out with people, and kind of reject that at a certain point, reject that natural kind of inclination to just be worldly and do those worldly things that teenagers would do. Don't get me wrong, I kind of got involved in those things to
Mhm.
some extent too, in marijuana and alcohol, and that kind of came up, and that was also what contributed to the difficulties of my teenage years. But through all of that, I got disillusioned with it all, and there was a time actually when I had one friend that I had from childhood, and he I saw him periodically when we were young, quite often when we were younger, and then periodically as I got into my teenage years, because he kind of he lived part in another part of the county at one point, and at part of the time, and so it wasn't always easy to see him, but but I was also just naturally a loner, and I liked being by myself and that kind of thing, and I never quite felt like I fit in with people, so it always just was a little bit uncomfortable. But I got drawn in by peer pressure to these things,
Mhm.
and I ended up smoking marijuana and doing you know drinking alcohol when there was that happened, and my energy was low at that point. And there was one part when I started realizing I need to do something about it. I had kind of dropped out of it was right around that time, in my junior year I kind of dropped out of classes,
Mhm.
and I was uh, I got really disillusioned by it all. They had said, oh, you need to figure out the electives you're going to take, because then that will feed into the area of focus you're going to go in college, which will lead to your career. And then, so you got to figure that out now. I'm like, what are you talking about? How am I supposed to figure that out? I have no idea who I am or what I want out of life. So it was really like a struggle for me to try to deal with all of that. And there wasn't a lot of meaning in school to me. And so I dropped out of, except for just a few classes.
Mhm.
Um, and my senior year, I just had choir and drama, which I enjoyed drama.
Uh-huh.
And so I just stayed in because I thought, well, I can do it for free, and it's something, and something I enjoy, and I'll just get work through it. I ended up taking a proficiency exam,
In the end,
just
you just get through.
which to
So
just, yeah.
so
Sorry,
some
I went on.
so somewhere in that period, you were actually finally able to read Autobiography of a Yogi, and so did you go directly from reading Autobiography of Yogi into Ananda? When did you come to Ananda on your own without your family?
There was there was a lot. There was like an inner struggle that happened with me in those years, like 16 and 17, where I knew I wanted to something more out of life, but I didn't know how to deal with it or how to get it.
Right.
And I was mostly, on my own. I was living with my mother most of the time, and Rose. But so again, I was really influenced by my peers, um, and I was in these bad habits. But I do remember there was a time when I was stoned because
Mhm.
just the habit of it. But I was thinking about it, and I thought, well, why am I doing this?
Mhm.
You know, and am I getting anything out of this?
Mhm.
And the thought came to, well, sometimes, you hear about Native Americans and they'll do some kind of drug and then they use it to help them go deeper, get a more expanded kind of consciousness or something like that. And I thought, okay, well, if this is will help me or anything, then it should be able to aid meditation.
Mhm.
So I sat down to meditate,
Mhm.
and I came to the conclusion that it was not something that helped meditation. Through my own experience,
Uh-huh.
it was just difficult to raise my eyes
Yeah,
upward, and it was, I felt my energy just drawn heavily downward.
interesting.
I felt my consciousness masked, and just it was hard to expand it.
Right.
And I realized just so tangibly that um, what this was doing to my consciousness, and
Mhm.
that I needed to shift it and change it. And so I think from that experience led to my realizing that, okay, my senior year, I'm going to be getting out of the high school experience. I think I've pretty much passed my proficiency at that point, and I'm going to be getting to the place where I can kind of control my own life and do my own things. And I wanted it to be in a place where I had control over it, of my energy, and where I could use my energy and expand my consciousness, and do things. I knew I needed that. I knew I needed that. And I had had enough interaction with Ananda that I knew that that was something I needed. Um, so I was like, I need to go up to the village and be there for a little while, and kind of um, get a regular meditation practice, because
Mhm.
it was hard for me to do on my own.
Mhm.
Um, so ministers would come, and that kind of came up, and they're like, oh, well, there's the karma yoga program.
Mhm.
And then we went up for some reason. We went to the village to visit, and we are talking with somebody. I think it might have been um, Giridhara,
Mhm.
Giridhara and Nalini. They came a lot to Santa Rosa, and so we were familiar with them. I knew them, and I think they said, "Oh, well, there's this summer internship program that's going to happen. Maybe you'd like that." And that clicked for me. I was like, "Oh, it's going to be a month long. Okay, that's great." And it's going to be set activities you're going to do, and there's going to be regular sadhanas, and it's going to be all kind of you know organized. And I really liked that. But I really liked having the schedule of things we were all going to do together. So I signed up for that, and
Uh-huh.
it costed money. So I worked with my dad so I could get the money, but so I could go, and they think they helped me with some of it. And um, the day that was supposed to be my high school graduation,
Uh-huh.
which I didn't need to go to because I had passed the proficiency, that was the day that I went up to Ananda Village.
Oh, that's perfect. That's a
Yeah.
perfect shift. Did you leave after that program, or did you just stay once you got there? Once you
Did I
got
leave?
I mean, once you got to the intern program, were you in Ananda Village ever after that?
Yeah, I hadn't known at the time. I thought I'd go back to Santa Rosa, and I'd try to find some work, some simple work I could do, and I could maybe live with my dad or my mom, until I found a place or something. At near the end of the program,
Mhm.
they had said, "Hey, what are you going to do?" And I thought, "Oh, I'd love to live here, but I don't see how."
Uh-huh.
And so Scott, I don't know if he took that on himself, but he
Uh-huh.
had talked with um, Daiva.
Uh-huh.
I keep remembering other people's names
Yeah.
sometimes, and not.
Uh-huh.
So he had talked to Daiva, who was managing Earth Song Cafe at the time,
Mhm.
and they were in need of a prep cook.
Uh-huh.
So they said, "Well, would you like to be the prep cook?" And I said, "Yeah,
Mhm.
and that means I can stay here. Yeah, I'll do that." And so um, Daiva came, and I talked with him at some point, and he said, "Well, that's great. Come on down at this date, and we'll get you trained and all of that kind of stuff." So I was just
So
so
you were born into a family that was disciples of Master. You kind of messed around a little bit during your adolescence. Then Master drew you in through Autobiography of the Yogi. So basically, you just passed the time until you were old enough to get into the ashram, more or less. Would you say?
I I always knew that Ananda was, well, there was an increasing understanding that Ananda was my path as
Mhm.
I was getting older.
Mhm.
And but I knew that I didn't have the volition, I didn't have the motivation and the discipline to commit to it yet.
Mhm.
And I knew I needed to wait until I was mature enough, and I did have the discipline to commit, because I didn't want to commit to Ananda, um, and then haven't this, a non-committal response later
Right.
and have that go away. I didn't want that to, it was too much of a serious subject to me for that to happen. So I knew I needed to wait until I was ready. And at that point, when I was 17, I was ready. So
That was young and that was good. Aaron, I'm going to switch this a little bit. You mentioned being in the choir, and of course, I have heard you sing, and you sing very beautifully. What does Swami's music mean to you now?
uh, it's it means everything. It's
Yeah.
hard to put into words, I guess. Um, it's an integral part of my spiritual journey, my spiritual growth. Um, I've been able to, I feel like I've been able to expand my consciousness, feel Divine Mother's presence, feel God, feel Master through that as much as through meditation. Um, and it's helped deepen my meditation. And of course, meditations helped me to um, understand the music more deeply, understand it in a subtler, more deep way, um, and it's just gotten deeper over the years, where I feel like I can really feel God's presence in it, singing it, hearing it. Um,
If
yeah.
you were going to try to describe to someone what is Swami's music like, how would you try to describe it? Mm.
um, it's music that carries a vibration that can uplift and change your consciousness in such a way that you can tune into higher consciousness, that you can tune into God. Um, if you are open to it in that way, um, because it's easy to just hear the notes and hear the words, and um, if you just do that, then it's just music. But if you open your heart to it, then it can change your consciousness.
I'll ask you one more question. What does it mean to you to be a disciple of Master?
Um, it means being a part of this ray that was brought through Babaji and Master and through Swami, because that's the ray that I tune into. Um, that will lead you to God, that will lead you to liberation. Um, and it's that commitment to um, the guide that will help lead you there, lead you to that.
If you
Sorry, I'm so emotional.
No, no, it's something it's worth being emotional about, my friend. If you think about sort of going forward, um, what does an ideal disciple? How would you make yourself a more and better disciple?
By by being able to be more in tune, more deeply aware of God's consciousness flowing through me, um, and to more deeply aware of the fact that God is the doer in my life and in everybody and in everything around me.
That's perfect. Well, my friend, thank you very much, Erin, for sharing so much from your heart.
Thank you.
I really am very touched by everything that you told us. It's
My pleasure.
nice to meet the whole family. God bless you.